Hey guys, tonight we're taking a truly uncomfortable journey back to the very origins of long-distance travel, to the vast, sprawling network of what we now call the Roman roads. Forget the modern conveniences of smooth asphalt, air conditioning, and GPS. You're about to discover what sucked about taking a road trip in the Roman Empire, a grim reality where every mile brought bone-jarring discomfort, pervasive dust, constant threats, and an utterly exhausting pace that made even a short journey a monumental ordeal. This wasn't a leisurely vacation, it was a brutal test of endurance, patience, and sheer luck. Frankly, you probably wouldn't survive the first day on a Roman road without longing for the comforts of your own home, let alone an entire multi-day journey across the empire. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me, where in the world are you tuning in from, and what time is it for you right now? Dim the lights? Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself suddenly standing on what appears to be a typical Roman road, somewhere in Gaul or Britannia, perhaps around the 2nd century CE. The height of the empire's prosperity. The sun beats down, casting long shadows, and the air is thick with the dust churned up by countless travelers. You might see legionaries marching, merchants with their carts, and imperial messengers galloping past. You, perhaps a wealthy Roman citizen embarking on a journey to visit your estate in the provinces, or a merchant heading to a distant market, are about to discover that the most fabled infrastructure of the ancient world held some profound and deeply uncomfortable secrets. This is the fabled roads, and their reality was bumpy, dusty, and treacherous. The famous Roman roads, renowned for their engineering marvels, their straightness, and their durability, were indeed impressive. They spanned thousands of miles across the vast empire, facilitating military movements, trade, and communication. However, the popular image of these roads as perfectly smooth, paved highways, akin to modern asphalt, is a widespread misconception. While major arterial roads near cities might have been paved with large, flat stones, much of the vast network, especially in rural areas or newly conquered provinces, would be far less refined. Imagine the reality of your journey. You would be traveling not on a uniform, even surface, but on a road that was often bumpy and uneven. Even paved sections after years of use would feature uneven stones, potholes, and cracks, causing constant jarring and vibrations as your carriage or cart rolled over them. This wasn't a smooth ride, it was a constant, bone-rattling experience that would leave you aching and bruised. The individual stones, though meticulously laid, were not a perfectly flat surface, meaning every joint in your body would feel the impacts. Dusty or muddy in dry weather, the unpaved or gravel sections of the road, and even the loose earth between the paving stones would create immense clouds of dust churned up by thousands of marching feet, countless hooves, and dozens of carts. Imagine riding for hours, constantly enveloped in a choking cloud of fine, gritty dust that irritated your eyes, clogged your nostrils, and settled into every pore of your skin and every fiber of your clothing. Your hair would be caked, your face perpetually grimed, and your lungs would constantly battle the dry, irritating particles. It truly sucked to literally eat dirt for days. In wet weather, these same roads would transform into deep, sucking quagmires of mud, making every step an arduous slog for horses and every wheel rotation a struggle for carts. Your carriage wheels would sink, throwing mud and grime onto your clothes, and your journey would slow to a frustrating crawl. Treacherous and rough, Much of the Roman road network traversed challenging terrain, mountain passes, dense forests, and rocky hillsides. Even where engineered, the roads often clung precariously to cliffs or wound through narrow defiles. Unpaved sections would be riddled with loose rocks, exposed roots, and uneven ruts, increasing the risk of your carriage overturning or your horse stumbling, especially in the darkness or during bad weather. A simple sprained ankle could quickly turn into a life-threatening emergency in a world without modern medical care. Crowded and chaotic Roman roads were arteries of the empire, constantly in use by a diverse array of travelers marching legions, imperial messengers on horseback, long lines of merchant wagons, and individual travelers like yourself. This constant traffic created chaos, bottlenecks, and frequent jostling, adding to the stress and discomfort of your journey. Imagine trying to navigate a narrow, uneven road, constantly dodging carts, weary soldiers, and nervous horses, all while enveloped in a cloud of dust. It truly sucked to share your highway with an entire army. The very construction of these roads, while impressive, contributed to the discomfort. Roman roads were built to be durable and efficient for military movement, emphasizing straightness and solid foundations, often with multiple layers of stone, gravel, and packed earth. This robust construction made them last for centuries, but it did not prioritize the comfort of civilian travelers in unsprung carriages, which we'll discuss later. They were built for legions, not for leisurely road trips. The lack of proper signage and clear directions was another subtle torment. While some milestones existed marking distances to Rome or other major cities, comprehensive maps for civilian travel were rare and clear. Standardized road signs as we know them today were non-existent. You would rely on local knowledge, guides who might be unreliable or dishonest, or the rough directions provided by inns, constantly unsure if you were on the correct path, adding a layer of pervasive anxiety to your already difficult journey. Imagine taking a wrong turn and getting lost for days in unfamiliar, potentially hostile territory. Your supplies dwindling. It really sucked to navigate without Google Maps. The constant vibration and jarring from the uneven roads had profound physical effects. Your body, particularly your spine, neck, and joints, would absorb countless shocks and jolts over hours and days of travel, leading to persistent aches, muscle stiffness, and chronic pain. Headaches would be common, exacerbated by the constant jostling and the pervasive dust. Long journeys would leave you perpetually fatigued, your body protesting the continuous battering. You might even suffer from internal bruising or nausea due to the constant motion. One common misconception is that the Roman Empire had a uniform system of perfectly paved roads extending everywhere. In reality, the quality and type of Roman road varied immensely. While major military and imperial routes were indeed magnificently engineered and often paved via vast portions of the network, particularly secondary roads via gravel roads or local tracks, were unpaved, gravel, or simply cleared earth, offering far rougher travel. The iconic paved sections often seen in modern illustrations represent only a fraction of the total road network. Historians still meticulously study archaeological findings of different road types, e.g., examining cross-sections of ancient roads to determine construction materials and methods, and compare them with Roman textual descriptions, itineraries, military accounts to understand the precise quality and varying conditions of the vast Roman road network, confirming the widespread prevalence of less refined and far bumpier surfaces. Furthermore, the lack of roadside amenities was stark. While mutationes, relay stations for imperial messengers, and mansiones, Official inns for state business existed on some routes. They were often far apart and not always available or suitable for ordinary travelers. This meant long stretches of road with no access to clean water, food, or shelter, forcing you to carry all your provisions or rely on sparse, often unreliable, local hospitality. The environment itself was often barren and unforgiving, adding another layer of physical discomfort and perpetual vigilance to your journey. The psychological toll of enduring such constant physical discomfort, the pervasive dust and smells, and the nagging uncertainty of navigation would be immense. You would spend hours in silent endurance, your mind battling boredom and fatigue, occasionally punctuated by moments of intense anxiety or fear. Your journey, meant to connect distant lands, would instead transform into a profound test of your physical and mental resilience, ensuring that every mile gained was paid for with continuous discomfort. So, your Roman road trip began with the brutal reality of the fabled roads themselves, bumpy, dusty, and treacherous. Far from smooth highways, these uneven, often unpaved paths, choked with dust or mud and teeming with chaotic traffic, ensured a constant, bone-jarring ride, this pervasive physical discomfort, a direct consequence of the road's utilitarian design and the limitations of ancient infrastructure, was the first, and perhaps most foundational, aspect of what sucked about taking a road trip in the Roman Empire. Having embarked on your Roman road trip and immediately experienced the bone-jarring reality of its fabled roads, your greatest challenge now became the agonizingly slow and steady pace of travel itself. Forget modern speeds and rapid transit. Your journey would consume immense time and effort, making even seemingly short distances feel like endless treks, and your entire experience profoundly sucked. Imagine the beginning of your day on the road. Despite waking before dawn, your progress would be frustratingly slow. Your primary mode of travel, if you were a wealthy citizen or a merchant with goods, would likely be a horse-drawn carriage or wagon. These vehicles, while offering more comfort than walking, were incredibly inefficient by modern standards. Horses and mules, though strong, could only maintain a limited speed, particularly when pulling heavy loads over uneven terrain. It truly sucked to literally go at a snail's pace. A typical Roman traveler on horseback could cover around 30-40 miles, 48-64 kilometers per day on good roads. For a wheeled vehicle, especially a heavy wagon laden with goods or a carriage carrying multiple passengers, the pace would be significantly slower, averaging perhaps 15-25 miles, 24-40 kilometers per day. This meant that even a journey of a few hundred miles, which you might cover in a modern car in a few hours, would take you weeks, sometimes months. Imagine planning a trip that seems short on a map, only to find it consuming a significant portion of your life. It really sucked to literally lose weeks just to travel. The constraints on speed were numerous and relentless. Animal limitations. Horses and mules needed regular rest, food, and water. Pushing them too hard could lead to injury, exhaustion, or death. A catastrophic loss of your most vital transportation. Their pace dictated yours. Road conditions. As discussed in Chapter 1, even paved Roman roads were bumpy and uneven. Unpaved sections were dusty, muddy, or treacherous. These conditions inherently slowed down wheeled vehicles, causing constant jarring, requiring cautious navigation, and increasing the risk of accidents. Daylight hours. Travel was primarily limited to daylight hours. Night travel, without effective lighting beyond torches, was incredibly dangerous due to uneven terrain, lack of visibility, and the threat of bandits. This meant your travel day was restricted by the sun, forcing you to stop at inns or camps as soon as dusk fell. Regardless of how much further you wished to go, Logistical stops. You would need to make frequent stops for your animals to rest and graze, for fresh water, and for your own meals. These stops, while necessary, ate into your precious travel time. Traffic Roman roads, particularly major ones, were often crowded with other travelers, legions marching, merchant wagons, imperial messengers, and local traffic. This congestion could cause bottlenecks and slow your progress, especially at narrow points or near city gates. The monotony of the journey would be immense. Day after day, you would see the same changing landscapes, hear the same sounds of hooves and creaking wheels, and feel the same constant jarring from the road. The lack of entertainment beyond simple conversation, which could grow stale over weeks, or observation of the passing scenery, would lead to profound boredom. Your mind, active and accustomed to the dynamism of city life, would find itself dulled by the relentless, slow rhythm of travel. It really sucked to be bored to death on the road. The sheer time consumption of travel had significant economic and personal impacts. For a merchant, weeks or months spent on the road meant your capital was tied up for extended periods, delaying your profits and limiting the number of journeys you could undertake. For a citizen, it meant prolonged absence from your home, family, and business affairs, disrupting your life and potentially incurring costs or losses. The opportunity cost of travel was immense, effectively consuming large chunks of your productive life simply to move from one place to another. One common misconception is that the famous Roman road network made travel incredibly fast and efficient by ancient standards. Akin to a modern interstate system, while it was indeed the most advanced road system of its time, allowing for faster military movement and more reliable trade than previous eras, its speed was still incredibly slow by modern standards. The famous phrase, "all roads lead to Rome," refers more to strategic connectivity than to rapid transit. The primary beneficiaries of rapid travel were often imperial messengers using state-run postal systems, cursus publicus, who changed horses frequently at relay stations. Not ordinary citizens or merchants. Historians still meticulously study Roman itineraries like the Itinerarium Antonini Augusti. Archaeological evidence of travel speeds, e.g., analyzing wear patterns on roads or the spacing of mansions, and contemporary accounts of journey times, consistently confirming the slow, arduous nature of general Roman travel. Furthermore, the psychological toll of this agonizingly slow pace would be immense. You would live with perpetual frustration at the lack of progress, the constant feeling of being stuck, and the knowledge that your destination was still weeks away. Homesickness, anxiety about your distant affairs, and the sheer mental exhaustion of continuous, unvarying travel would erode your spirit. Your journey, meant to be a bridge between places, would instead transform into a prolonged test of patience, physically jarring and mentally draining. The very act of moving, meant to bring you closer to your goal, would become a source of profound, unending discomfort. The reliance on animal power also introduced vulnerabilities. Your horses or mules could fall ill, suffer injuries, or simply become exhausted, forcing unscheduled, costly delays. You would be utterly dependent on their health and endurance, adding another layer of anxiety to your slow progress. A sick horse could literally leave you stranded in the middle of nowhere, turning a delay into a life-threatening emergency. Far from any familiar help, the constant need for sustenance for your animals further complicated matters. You would have to carry sufficient fodder or rely on finding grazing areas along the route, a logistical challenge that added bulk and weight to your supplies. This constant attention to your animals' needs, essential for your own slow progress, consumed additional time and resources. reinforcing the tedious nature of the journey. So, your Roman road trip was profoundly sucked by its slow and steady pace. Every day brought agonizingly slow progress, consuming immense time and effort, driven by the limitations of animal power and road conditions. This relentless, monotonous crawl, making even short distances feel like endless treks, was a defining, profoundly uncomfortable aspect of Roman travel, ensuring that your journey across the empire was a prolonged, physically jarring, and mentally exhausting ordeal. Having settled into the agonizingly slow pace of your Roman road trip, your primary means of transport, the Roman carriage caruca or reda, quickly revealed itself as a brutally uncomfortable instrument of prolonged misery. Forget comfortable suspension or cushioned seats. Your journey would be a constant, jarring ordeal, designed for utility and endurance, not for passenger comfort, making your travel profoundly sucked. Imagine settling into your carriage for a long day's journey. These vehicles, whether a smaller, lighter caruca for personal travel or a heavier reda for carrying goods and multiple passengers, were fundamentally different from modern automobiles. The most glaring omission was suspension. Ancient Roman carriages lacked springs or shock absorbers. The wooden body of the carriage would be mounted directly onto the axle, meaning every single bump, every rut, and every uneven stone on the road, as discussed in Chapter 1, would be directly transmitted through the wooden frame to your body. It truly sucked to literally feel every bump in the road with your spine. This complete lack of suspension meant your ride was a perpetual, bone-jarring experience. As your carriage rolled over the uneven Roman roads, you would be constantly jostled, bounced, and slammed against the hard wooden seats or walls. Your spine would absorb countless shocks. Your neck would ache from constant snapping movements, and your entire body would be bruised and sore from the incessant jarring. Imagine trying to read, write, or even simply relax while your body was being relentlessly battered by the road beneath you. This continuous physical assault made rest impossible and conversation a constant struggle. The seats themselves offered little comfort. They were typically hard wooden benches, perhaps covered with a thin cushion of straw or rough fabric if you were lucky. There were no ergonomic designs, no plush padding, nothing to absorb the constant impact. Long hours spent sitting in such an uncomfortable position, coupled with the relentless jarring, would lead to severe back pain, numbness in your limbs, and persistent muscle stiffness. You would constantly shift your position, desperately trying to find a less painful spot, but relief would be elusive. It really sucked to literally sit on a wooden torture device. The carriages were also exposed to the elements. While some might have a simple roof or a canvas cover, they were rarely fully enclosed. This meant you were constantly exposed to the sun's glare. The dust churned up by the road, as discussed in Chapter 1, the biting wind, and any rain that might fall. Dust would coat your clothes and belongings, sun would beat down on your face, and cold winds would seep into every crevice. Adding to your discomfort, a sudden downpour could soak you and your belongings, leaving you shivering and miserable for hours. As there was little warmth or shelter inside the open vehicle, it really sucked to be a human dust bunny in a metal box. The noise inside the carriage would be immense. The constant creaking and groaning of the wooden frame, the loud clatter of the iron-shod wheels on the stone or gravel roads, the incessant jingle of harness bells, and the shouts of the driver would combine into a cacophony that would pound relentlessly at your ears. Conversation would require shouting, adding to your vocal strain. This continuous auditory assault would be mentally exhausting, preventing any moments of true quiet or relaxation during your journey. Imagine trying to think clearly over a constant, deafening rumble. It really sucked to be constantly orally assaulted. The very design for utility rather than comfort was a deliberate choice. Roman carriages were built to be durable and functional, capable of traversing vast distances and carrying heavy loads efficiently for military or administrative purposes. The priority was on strength, reliability, and low maintenance, not on passenger well-being. Your comfort was secondary to the empire's logistical needs. This pragmatic approach to vehicle design directly contributed to the profound physical misery of travel. One common misconception is that all Roman citizens, particularly the wealthy, enjoyed luxurious and comfortable travel by carriage. While the very richest might have customized carriages with slightly better padding or more ornate decoration, the fundamental lack of suspension technology meant that even the most expensive Roman carriage would still deliver a jarring, uncomfortable ride by modern standards. The true luxury of travel for the elite was often having a large retinue of slaves and animals to manage the arduous journey. Rather than the intrinsic comfort of the vehicle itself, historians still meticulously study archaeological findings of Roman carriage remnants, siege, axle components, wheel fragments, artistic depictions, frescoes, reliefs, and ancient textual descriptions. Seneca's complaints about travel, discomfort to reconstruct the precise design, construction, and ride quality of various Roman carriages, consistently confirming their general lack of suspension and inherent discomfort. Furthermore, the long duration of journeys, as discussed in Chapter 2, compounded the misery of the uncomfortable carriage. Hours would stretch into days, and days into weeks, all spent enduring the constant jarring, the cramped seating, the pervasive dust, and the relentless noise. Your body would slowly accumulate trauma from the constant battering, leading to chronic aches, stiffness, and persistent fatigue that would permeate your entire journey. There was no escaping the discomfort. It was a constant, intimate companion. The cramped nature of the interior, especially if you were traveling with multiple passengers or luggage, added to the misery. You would be confined to a small space, unable to stretch your legs or shift position comfortably. This lack of movement would lead to stiffness, numbness, and further exacerbate any pre-existing aches. Your personal space would be invaded by your travel companions and their belongings, making the journey feel even more suffocating. The psychological toll of enduring such constant physical discomfort, the relentless noise, and the pervasive dust would be immense. You would spend hours in silent endurance, your mind battling boredom and fatigue, occasionally punctuated by moments of intense frustration or pain. The very act of moving, which should have brought you closer to your destination, would instead become a source of profound, unending discomfort, transforming your journey into a grueling physical and mental trial. So, your Roman road trip was profoundly sucked by the carica itself, a bumpy, uncomfortable prison, the jarring ride due to the complete lack of suspension, the hard seats, the exposure to the elements, and the incessant noise combined to make every mile an agonizing ordeal. This physically brutal and profoundly uncomfortable mode of transport, designed for utility and endurance rather than passenger well-being, was a defining, profoundly miserable aspect of Roman travel, ensuring that your journey across the empire was a prolonged, bone-rattling, and utterly exhausting experience, even as your body suffered the relentless jarring of the caruca, and your spirit dulled from the agonizingly slow pace. Your journey through the Roman Empire brought a constant, terrifying peril, food, and filth. Forget clean dining or readily available provisions. your sustenance on the road was often unreliable, contaminated, and consumed in squalid conditions, making your travel profoundly sucked. Imagine the pervasive hunger and thirst that would be your constant companions. Unlike modern road trips with endless fast food options and clean rest stops, finding safe and palatable food and water was a daily struggle. You were far from the comforts of your city home, where fresh bread and relatively clean well water might be a given. On the road, your dependence shifted to roadside establishments, which were often less than ideal. It truly sucked to gamble your health with every meal. Your primary sources of food would be what you carried or what you could acquire at roadside inns, mansions, or caupone. Carried provisions. You might carry a supply of hardtack dry biscuits, salted meat or fish, cheese, and dried fruits like figs or dates. While relatively shelf-stable, these items were monotonous, often unappetizing, and lacked fresh vitamins. Over time, they could become stale, moldy if exposed to dampness, or infested with insects. Imagine constantly chewing on rock-hard biscuits and tough, overly salty meat, your palate aching for something fresh. Food. When you stopped at an inn, the food offered would be simple, often coarse, and of questionable quality. You might get a basic porridge, some bread, or perhaps a stew made from whatever local ingredients were available. Meat, if served, might be heavily spiced to mask a slightly off flavor, or could be from diseased animals. Without refrigeration, food spoilage was rampant, and hygiene in roadside kitchens was rudimentary at best. You ran a constant risk of consuming contaminated food, leading to severe food poisoning, agonizing stomach cramps, vomiting, and debilitating dysentery, the bloody flux. It truly sucked to question every bite of your dinner. Water scarcity and contamination were perhaps the most immediate and terrifying threats. Your carried water supply in a laguna would quickly deplete under the sun and exertion. You would be utterly reliant on natural sources or wells at inns. Unreliable sources, rivers, and streams, while seemingly fresh, could be polluted by human and animal waste upstream, particularly near towns or military camps. Wells, while often safer, could still be shallow and easily contaminated. Contaminated water, drinking suspect water, was an almost guaranteed path to waterborne diseases. Imagine your agonizing thirst, your lips cracked, your throat parched, knowing that every sip of murky, unboiled water might bring you relentless diarrhea, debilitating fever, or even a swift, agonizing death miles from any effective medical help. You were perpetually gambling your life with every mouthful of liquid. It truly sucked to be thirsty, but fear the water. The unsanitary conditions at roadside inns and the general lack of hygiene on the road exacerbated these dangers. Filth at inns, often catering to numerous travelers and their animals, were rarely clean, as we'll discuss in Chapter 6. Waste accumulation, flies, and rodents were common, contaminating food preparation areas and storage. Personal hygiene. You, the traveler, would have limited access to clean water for washing yourself or your utensils. The pervasive dust from the roads would cling to everything, and sweat, combined with unwashed clothing, would create a constant, uncomfortable grime. This overall lack of hygiene facilitated the spread of disease, turning even minor ailments into serious threats. The cumulative effect of this monotonous, often contaminated, diet and unreliable water was chronic malnutrition and a compromised immune system. Even if you didn't suffer an acute food poisoning episode, the consistent lack of fresh fruits and vegetables would lead to vitamin deficiencies like scurvy, causing bleeding gums and fatigue, and mineral deficiencies like anemia, leading to chronic weakness. Your body, perpetually undernourished and battling environmental stressors, would be highly susceptible to any circulating pathogen, turning a simple cold into a life-threatening pneumonia. You were perpetually battling hidden hungers and unseen killers. It truly sucked to have your body slowly fail you. One common misconception is that the existence of Roman roads automatically implied a perfectly managed and safe supply chain for travelers. While the roads themselves were well built for their time, the actual infrastructure for civilian food, water, and hygiene along vast stretches of these roads was often rudimentary and vulnerable to contamination. The emphasis was on enabling travel, not necessarily on ensuring traveler comfort or health, particularly for those below the very highest social strata. The pervasive issue of contaminated water sources and food spoilage was a constant challenge for all ancient travelers. Historians still meticulously study archaeological findings from Roman roadside settlements, mansions, and calpone, analyzing remnants of food storage, water systems, and waste disposal to understand the precise dietary conditions and health risks faced by travelers, consistently finding evidence of frequent contamination and widespread illness. Furthermore, the psychological toll of constantly battling hunger, thirst, and the fear of consuming contaminated provisions would be immense. Your mind would be perpetually consumed by the search for sustenance, leading to a profound sense of anxiety and desperation. The knowledge that a single bad meal or a sip of tainted water could lead to agonizing illness and even death, far from any effective medical help, would make every act of eating and drinking a source of profound dread. This constant vigilance, this relentless worry, would erode your peace of mind, transforming your journey into a grueling, never-ending ordeal of survival against unseen biological threats. The very limited nature of ancient medicine exacerbated all these issues. If you contracted dysentery from contaminated water, or food poisoning from spoiled meat, your body's only defense was its own resilience. There were no antibiotics, no intravenous fluids for dehydration, and very little understanding of how to manage severe gastrointestinal illnesses. Healers might offer rudimentary herbal remedies or spiritual charms, but these were often ineffective, leaving you to suffer and potentially die in agony. Far from the comforts of home and proper care, your survival was a matter of immense luck, not reliable medical intervention. So, your Roman road trip was profoundly sucked by food and filth. Your daily sustenance was a constant struggle against scarcity, spoilage, and pervasive contamination, threatening you with constant illness and slow starvation. The unreliable, often contaminated, food and water sources at inns and along the roadside, coupled with rudimentary hygiene, ensured that every meal was a terrifying gamble with your health and your life. This pervasive dietary peril, transforming nourishment into a source of constant dread, was a defining, profoundly horrifying aspect of taking a road trip in the Roman Empire. Even as your body struggled against the squalor of roadside inns and the dangers of contaminated food, your life on a Roman road trip was a constant, terrifying dance with human and animal predators. Forget peaceful journeys. Bandits and beasts lurked at every turn, making every mile a perilous gamble for your goods, your freedom, and your very life, thus profoundly sucked. Imagine the pervasive anxiety that settled over you with every turn in the road, every dense patch of forest, every desolate stretch of plain. While the Roman Empire was vast and its roads generally safer than in other ancient empires, stretches of them, particularly in remote provinces, mountainous regions, or areas affected by war, were still rife with human predators. You were a wealthy merchant if carrying goods, or a respectable citizen if traveling for leisure or business, making you an irresistible target in a world where wealth was concentrated and easy prey was sought. It truly sucked to be a walking target. Human predators were the most immediate and terrifying threat. Bandits latrone. These were desperate outlaws, often former soldiers, displaced peasants, or simply opportunistic criminals. They would lurk in narrow defiles, hidden valleys, dense forests, or behind large rocks, waiting for the perfect moment to ambush unsuspecting travelers. Their tactics were brutal and swift. They would typically strike with overwhelming force, using bows, slings, spears, and swords to quickly incapacitate your guards, if you had any, or simply terrify your retinue into submission. Imagine the sudden chaos arrows raining down, the shouts of attackers, the panicked cries of your animals, and the clang of steel as your few armed escorts desperately tried to form a defense. Your heart would pound with raw terror, knowing that your life and your fortune hung precariously in the balance. Consequences of a bandit attack. If your group was overwhelmed, the consequences were dire. Robbery. The primary goal, all your precious goods, whether silk, wine, grain, or personal valuables, would be brutally seized. Your entire investment, your years of effort, and your family's future could vanish in an instant, leaving you utterly destitute. Violence and injury resistance would be met with brutal force. You might be severely beaten, stabbed, or maimed. Bandits were not always interested in killing quickly. They often inflicted injuries to incapacitate or to teach a brutal lesson. Imagine the searing pain of a sword slash or the crushing blow of a club, knowing that proper medical care was days away. Kidnapping and ransom. If you were a particularly wealthy or prominent individual, you might be kidnapped and held for ransom. Your captors, often ruthless and desperate, would send messages to your family or business partners demanding immense sums for your release. This could lead to a prolonged, terrifying captivity, marked by starvation, torture, and the constant fear that your family might not be able to pay, leading to your eventual execution. Imagine being chained in a dark, foul-smelling cave, constantly fearing for your life. Your only hope, the distant promise of ransom. It really sucked to be worth more dead than alive. Enslavement. For many, especially if you were a common traveler or a less wealthy merchant, capture meant outright enslavement. You would be sold into the brutal slave markets of the empire, your freedom irrevocably stripped away. Your life would be reduced to forced labor, a commodity to be bought and sold, with no hope of return to your former life. Imagine going from a free citizen or merchant to a piece of property overnight. Beyond common bandits, entire regions might be unstable due to local conflicts or renegade soldiers in areas affected by ongoing warfare or where imperial authority was weak. You might face unauthorized tolls, arbitrary arrests, or even attacks from disgruntled local militias or deserting legionaries. This pervasive lawlessness, this constant threat from armed men, created an atmosphere of profound insecurity. It truly sucked to be caught in someone else's war. Then there were the beasts of the wild, adding another layer of primeval fear. Wild animals? Roman roads often traversed through dense forests, along mountain ranges, or across sparsely populated plains, which were still home to various wild animals. While direct attacks on large, organized travel groups were rare, smaller groups or lone travelers could fall prey to wolves, bears, wild boars, or large cats in more remote regions. Imagine hearing the distant howl of wolves as dusk settled, knowing your crude roadside camp offered little protection. Venomous creatures in arid and rocky environments. Scorpions and venomous snakes posed a constant, hidden threat. A single bite could lead to agonizing pain, severe illness, or death without proper anti-venom, which was non-existent. Imagine being bitten in the middle of the night, your body racked with pain and fever. Far from any help, packs of wild dogs, abandoned or feral dogs, often starving, could roam in dangerous packs, posing a threat to both travelers and their livestock. The lack of centralized law enforcement across the vast stretches of the Roman Empire meant you were largely on your own. While Roman legions maintained order in their immediate garrisons and on major strategic routes, vast stretches between them were often lawless, offering no protection from these human and animal predators. Your safety depended entirely on the strength of your armed guards, the vigilance of your companions, the cunning of your guides, and sheer luck. This pervasive lawlessness, this constant threat from armed men and wild animals, created an atmosphere of profound insecurity, making true relaxation impossible. It truly sucked to be your own security force. One common misconception is that the Roman Empire's vast roads made travel perfectly safe, while Rome brought unprecedented stability and security to many regions compared to earlier periods. Banditry and other dangers persisted, particularly in remote areas during times of political instability or when imperial control was less direct. The very act of concentrating wealth on roads made merchants attractive targets. The Roman state did deploy stationary road police and military garrisons, but their coverage was not universal, especially outside major routes. Historians still meticulously study Roman legal texts concerning banditry, archaeological findings of roadside ambushes, and travelogues Jupais, those by Apuleius or Achilles Taccius, which feature numerous encounters with bandits to understand the precise prevalence and impact of these human threats on ancient Roman travelers, confirming that it was a persistent and widespread danger. Furthermore, the psychological toll of constantly facing such dangers would be immense. You would live with perpetual anxiety, always scanning the horizon, always assessing strangers, always ready for a sudden attack. Sleep would be restless and fitful, plagued by nightmares of ambush and violence. This relentless stress, this knowledge that your life and livelihood could be snatched away at any moment by a human aggressor or a wild beast, would erode your spirit, leaving you with a profound sense of insecurity and a deep distrust of others. Your journey was not just a physical endeavor, it was a constant battle against human malevolence and the unforgiving wild. The vulnerability of your animals also compounded the danger. Your horses, mules, or oxen were just as susceptible to attack or illness, and their loss would leave you stranded, your valuable goods exposed, and your journey effectively ended in the middle of nowhere. Protecting them was paramount, adding another layer of constant vigilance and stress to your already perilous journey. The ultimate irony was that the very wealth you sought to acquire made you a target. Your valuable goods, intended to bring prosperity, instead attracted danger, turning you into a walking magnet for violence and exploitation. The allure of immense profit was inextricably linked to the terrifying reality of potential ruin at the hands of desperate men or the unforgiving teeth and claws of the wild. So, your Roman road trip was profoundly sucked by bandits and beasts lurking at every turn. The pervasive threat of highway robbery, kidnapping, and enslavement by human predators, coupled with the dangers of the wild animals and venomous creatures, ensured that every mile was a perilous gamble for your goods, your freedom, and your very life. This constant, omnipresent danger was a defining, profoundly horrifying aspect of taking a road trip in the Roman Empire. Even as you evaded bandits and survived encounters with wild beasts, your Roman road trip was far from a comfortable journey. Your periods of rest were often consumed by the unsavory realities of roadside inns, which were frequently crowded, grimy, and dangerous, offering little true rest or security and making your travel profoundly sucked. Imagine arriving at a mansio, an official inn, for state travelers or wealthier individuals, or a caupona, a more common, often less reputable, inn after a long, bone-jarring day of travel. You might be aching from the carriage ride, caked in dust, and ravenously hungry. Your hope would be for a warm, clean bed and a decent meal. But the reality was often a stark contrast. It truly sucked to end a terrible day with a terrible night. Overcrowding was common. These inns served as vital stopping points for all manner of traveler soldiers, merchants, imperial couriers, commoners, and often their animals. The rooms, if available, would be small and cramped, often shared with multiple strangers. Privacy was a non-existent luxury. Imagine trying to sleep in a small, stuffy room with a dozen other people, their snores, coughs, and restless movements constantly disturbing your rest. The noise from the stables, the kitchen, and other guests would permeate your sleeping quarters, making restful sleep elusive. Sanitation was rudimentary at best and often appalling. Forget clean. Tiled bathrooms, latrines would be communal, often simple cesspits or holes in the ground, rarely cleaned, contributing to a pervasive stench that permeated the entire inn, especially on warm nights. Water for washing would be scarce and often suspect, drawn from communal wells that could be contaminated. Waste from kitchens and stables might accumulate in courtyards, attracting flies and vermin. Imagine the pervasive smell of stale urine, animal dung, and unwashed bodies, constantly assaulting your nostrils. It truly sucked to smell filth. Everywhere, filth and unhygiene were rampant. The inn rooms, the bedding often simple straw mattresses or rough blankets, and the communal dining areas would be grimy, dusty, and unsanitary. You would find yourself surrounded by the dirt of countless previous travelers, their sweat, their waste, and their diseases. The constant presence of fleas, lice, and bedbugs was almost guaranteed. Imagine trying to sleep, constantly itching, feeling tiny bites creeping across your body, knowing that these parasites could carry diseases. Your hope for rest would be shattered by the relentless irritation. It really sucked to share your bed with vermin. The food and water offered at inns were often of questionable quality. As discussed in Chapter 4, food could be spoiled, reheated leftovers, or prepared in unsanitary kitchens, risking severe food poisoning or dysentery. Water, drawn from communal wells, was often contaminated, making every sip a gamble with your health. The staff might be overworked, inattentive, or even dishonest, further compromising your comfort and safety. It really sucked to gamble your health on a roadside meal. Beyond mere discomfort and unhygiene, Roman inns could be outright dangerous. Theft, your precious goods, your money, and your personal belongings were constantly at risk. Other travelers, opportunistic staff, or even professional thieves who targeted inns could attempt to steal from your room or your carriage. You would have to sleep lightly, perpetually vigilant, perhaps keeping your most valuable items close to your body or under your head. Violence. Drunken brawls among travelers or local toughs were common. Arguments over rooms, food, or gambling could quickly escalate into physical altercations. Your safety depended on your own ability to defend yourself or on the presence of your armed retinue. Criminal elements. Some inns were known havens for criminals, offering a convenient base for highwaymen or local gangs. You might inadvertently find yourself sharing a common room with the very bandits who preyed on travelers, adding a chilling layer of anxiety to your stay. The reputation of Roman inns Coponi was often quite low. Roman moralists and writers frequently criticized them as places of vice, debauchery, and criminality, where travelers could be robbed, defrauded, or led astray. While this might be an exaggeration driven by aristocratic disdain for common lodging, it reflects a widespread perception of inns as unreliable and often dangerous establishments. Particularly for the unsuspecting or unwary, it truly sucked to sleep in a den of thieves. One common misconception is that all Roman inns were part of a well-regulated, safe network like modern hotels. In reality, while the cursus publicus imperial post system provided mansionies official inns for state business, these were not always open to private travelers and still varied in quality. For the ordinary traveler, the Capona was the primary option, and their quality, safety, and hygiene were highly inconsistent and often poor, operating largely outside strict imperial regulation. Many were simple, rough establishments run by opportunistic individuals, prioritizing profit over traveler welfare. Historians still meticulously study archaeological findings from Roman roadside settlements, including remnants of Caponi and associated refuse pits, and various Roman literary accounts like those in Petronius's Satyricon, which often feature crude inns to reconstruct the precise nature of these establishments and the dangers faced by travelers. Furthermore, the lack of privacy in these crowded inns was physically and psychologically draining. You couldn't escape the noise, the smells, or the constant presence of strangers. This relentless communal living, even during your rest periods, added to your overall fatigue and made it difficult to truly unwind or find peace of mind after a long day of travel. Your attempt to recover was constantly undermined by the very environment of your lodging. The psychological toll of constantly fearing for your safety, of battling infestations, and of enduring pervasive filth even in your moments of rest would be immense. You would live with perpetual anxiety, never truly able to relax. The memory of your uncomfortable nights, the constant itching, and the fear of unseen threats would make every stop a source of dread rather than relief. This chronic stress, combined with poor sleep and unsanitary conditions, would rapidly erode your physical and mental resilience. So, your Roman road trip was profoundly sucked by the unsavory realities of roadside inns. These crowded, grimy, and dangerous establishments offered little true rest or security, plaguing you with unsanitary conditions, questionable food, and the constant threat of theft or violence. This pervasive squalor, ensuring your moments of respite were often as miserable as your actual journey, was a defining, profoundly horrifying aspect of taking a road trip in the Roman Empire, even as you, the Roman traveler, battled unsanitary inns and lurking bandits. Your life on a Roman road trip was a constant losing fight against the weather's whim. Forget climate-controlled vehicles and accurate forecasts. You were perpetually at the mercy of extreme environmental conditions, scorching heat, freezing cold, and endless rain that plagued every mile, making your travel profoundly sucked. Imagine the immense discomfort. Day after day, week after week, your journey would traverse diverse climates across the vast Roman Empire, from the Mediterranean's intense heat to the chill of Britannia or Germania, and every season brought its own unique torments. You were utterly exposed to the elements in your unsprung carriage or on foot, with no effective means of protection beyond rudimentary clothing and your dwindling endurance. In the scorching heat of summer, particularly in regions like Italy, North Africa, or the Middle East, the sun would beat down with a relentless intensity. Temperatures could soar, easily exceeding ultra 1 hours in open areas. The dust from the roads, as discussed in Chapter 1, would hang in the air, exacerbating the stifling heat. You would sweat profusely, your body constantly trying to cool itself, rapidly losing vital fluids. Heat stroke and severe dehydration were constant. Terrifying threats. You would feel your head pounding, your mouth parched, your vision blurring, and your muscles cramping. Collapse could come swiftly, often leading to death if you couldn't find shade or water immediately. Imagine your throat raw, your lips cracked, your body aching for a single drop of water, knowing that precious liquid was miles away or contaminated. It truly sucked to literally bake on the road. As the seasons shifted, the torment simply transformed. The cold of winter, particularly in northern provinces like Gaul or Britannia, or in mountainous regions, brought a different, equally brutal kind of suffering. You would endure biting, icy winds that scoured the landscape, or slog through deep snow that sapped your energy with every step. Your woolen tunic and cloak, while providing some warmth, were often insufficient against sub-zero temperatures. Sleeping in flimsy tents if you couldn't find an inn or unheated inn rooms offered little reprieve, leading to chronic chills, aches, and severe sleep deprivation. Frostbite and hypothermia were constant dangers. Your exposed fingers, toes, nose, and ears were constantly at risk of freezing, leading to painful swelling, blistering, and potentially permanent disfigurement or loss of digits. Imagine your limbs growing numb, your body trembling uncontrollably, knowing that a moment's rest could mean freezing to death. It really sucked to literally freeze your assets off on the road. Rain and mud were relentless tormentors. Regardless of the season, in many parts of the empire, particularly in Western Europe, marching or riding through prolonged periods of rain was common. Your heavy clothes would become soaked, clinging uncomfortably to your skin and becoming even heavier as they absorbed water. The roads, even paved ones, would become slick and treacherous, turning unpaved paths into deep, sucking quagmires of mud. Your carriage wheels would sink, throwing mud and grime onto your clothes, and your journey would slow to a frustrating crawl. This constant dampness and filth would also lead to foot rot, skin infections, and the proliferation of lice and other parasites, further adding to your misery. Imagine slogging through knee-deep mud for miles, every step a Herculean effort, your Caligai offering little grip. It really sucked to wade through ankle-deep mud day after day. The lack of effective shelter on the open road compounded these environmental dangers. While Roman mansions' official inns existed, they were often far apart, leaving vast stretches of road with no access to proper shelter from extreme weather. You might be forced to make a crude roadside camp, exposed to the full fury of the elements, with only your cloak for protection. This constant vulnerability to the weather, with no real escape, intensified every discomfort and threat. One common misconception is that Roman travel was always comfortable due to the famous Roman roads. In reality, while the roads were impressive, the inherent challenges of ancient travel, lack of suspension, open vehicles, limited amenities, unpredictable weather meant that journeys were almost universally uncomfortable, often brutally so. Roman authors themselves, like Seneca or Horace, often complained about the discomforts of travel, including the dust, heat, and jarring carriages. This personal testimony from the elite confirms the widespread nature of these miseries. Historians still meticulously study ancient climate data, Roman travelogues, and archaeological findings of roadside settlements to understand the precise environmental challenges faced by Roman travelers in different campaigns and regions, consistently finding evidence of widespread suffering due to the elements. Furthermore, the psychological toll of constantly battling the elements cannot be overstated. The endless sun, the biting cold, the perpetual dampness, the endless dust or mud, these would erode your spirit, leaving you perpetually fatigued, irritable, and vulnerable to despair. You lived with a constant awareness of your own insignificance in the face of such overwhelming natural power, transforming the journey into a profound existential struggle. This relentless assault from the environment itself made every mile a terrifying gamble for survival, constantly chipping away at your physical and mental resilience. The unpredictability of the weather was a constant source of anxiety. A sudden blizzard in the mountains, an unexpected sandstorm in the desert, or a flash flood in a dry riverbed could appear without warning, trapping your carriage, ruining your supplies, or leaving you stranded and utterly at the mercy of the elements. This lack of control over your environment, this constant awareness of unforeseen natural catastrophes, added another layer of profound stress to an already brutal existence, making every day a roll of the dice with fate. The impact on your physical health was severe. Prolonged exposure to cold could lead to respiratory illnesses, joint pain, and frostbite. Constant heat could cause heat stroke, severe dehydration, and exhaustion. The dampness could lead to skin infections and overall malaise. Your body, already stressed by the journey, was constantly pushed to its limits by the environment, accelerating its decay and increasing your susceptibility to illness and injury, ensuring that a significant portion of your energy was spent simply surviving the weather itself. So, your Roman road trip was profoundly sucked by the weather's whim. You were perpetually at the mercy of extreme environmental conditions, scorching heat, freezing cold, and endless rain that plagued every mile, turning your journey into a constant battle for survival against the unforgiving forces of nature. This relentless assault from the elements, ensuring your profound physical discomfort and constant vulnerability, was a defining, profoundly horrifying aspect of taking a road trip in the Roman Empire, even as you, the Roman traveler, battled nature's relentless fury and the ubiquitous dangers of the road. Your journey across the vast empire was further plagued by a profound and constant challenge, communication breakdown. Forget reliable maps, clear road signs, or universal languages. Navigating vast territories without consistent guidance made you perpetually lost and uninformed. Turning your road trip into a profoundly sucked ordeal, imagine setting out from Rome, perhaps heading to distant provinces like Britannia or Syria. You would carry no detailed, comprehensive map as we know it today. While the Romans had itineraries, these were often mere lists of towns and distances, more like a basic route planner than a detailed topographical map. They rarely showed terrain features, small villages, or precise turnings. You couldn't simply pull out a scroll and pinpoint your exact location or anticipate upcoming detours. Your sense of direction would rely on landmarks, local knowledge, and the vagaries of imprecise descriptions. It truly sucked to navigate without GPS. Lack of standardized road signs was another major hurdle. While milestones miliaria marked distances to major cities, usually Rome itself, they rarely provided clear directional arrows for complex junctions or smaller roads branching off the main route. Imagine coming to a crossroads in a rural area with multiple unpaved tracks leading off into the wilderness and having no clear indication of which way to go. You would be utterly reliant on asking locals, who might speak a different dialect, be unfamiliar with your destination, or even deliberately mislead you. This constant uncertainty added immense stress to every segment of your journey. It really sucked to get lost all the time. The language barrier itself was immense across the vast, multicultural Roman Empire. While Latin was the official language of administration and the army, and Greek was common in the eastern provinces, countless local dialects and indigenous languages were spoken in the provinces. Imagine arriving in a small village in Gaul or Thrace, desperately needing directions, food, or a blacksmith, and finding that no one understands your Latin. You would resort to gestures, broken phrases, and frustrated repetition, often leading to misunderstandings, delays, or being pointed in the wrong direction. This constant struggle to communicate effectively created a profound sense of isolation and vulnerability. It truly sucked to be voiceless in a foreign land. No reliable interpreters unless you were a very wealthy merchant who could afford a dedicated interpreter in your retinue. You were largely on your own. Local interpreters, if found, might be unreliable, dishonest, or simply poor at their job. Further compounding the communication breakdown, dialect variations. Even within regions that spoke a common language like Latin, local dialects could vary significantly, making comprehension difficult and misunderstandings frequent. This linguistic diversity, while culturally rich, was a logistical nightmare for a traveler. The lack of real-time information meant you were almost always uninformed about immediate conditions on the road ahead. There were no weather forecasts, no traffic reports, no warnings about bandit activity until it was too late, or news of local unrest. You might set out thinking a path was safe, only to encounter a washed-out bridge, a bandit ambush, or a sudden tribal conflict. All without prior warning. Your journey was a series of unpredictable gambles, relying on outdated information or pure luck. It truly sucked to fly blind. This perpetual state of being lost and uninformed contributed to immense psychological stress. The constant anxiety about taking a wrong turn, running out of supplies in unknown territory, or stumbling into danger would gnaw at your peace of mind. You would live with perpetual frustration at delays caused by misunderstanding directions and a nagging fear of the unknown. Sleep would be restless, plagued by nightmares of getting hopelessly lost in a vast, indifferent landscape. This relentless mental strain, this constant battle against uncertainty, eroded your spirit, leaving you perpetually exhausted and disoriented. Your journey was not just a physical endeavor, it was a profound psychological ordeal of constant navigation. One common misconception is that the Roman Empire, due to its impressive roads, offered seamless and easily navigable travel for everyone. While the roads facilitated movement, the inherent limitations of ancient communications and technology, no printing for mass maps, no electronic signals meant that navigating complex routes, especially across diverse linguistic and cultural regions, remained a significant challenge for all but the most experienced travelers or imperial couriers. The Roman state primarily focused on military and administrative communication, not civilian ease of navigation. Historians still meticulously study Roman itineraries like the Tabula Peutingeriana, a surviving Roman roadmap of the world, milestones, and travelogues like those detailing journeys through unfamiliar provinces to understand the precise navigational challenges faced by travelers and how they compensated for the lack of modern mapping and signage, often revealing a reliance on local guides and sheer ingenuity. Furthermore, the threat of misinformation or deliberate deception was always present. A dishonest innkeeper might misdirect you to a rival establishment. A desperate local might give you wrong directions to lead you into a trap. Without reliable maps or clear signs, verifying information was incredibly difficult, leaving you vulnerable to malicious guidance. This added another layer of psychological pressure, making you distrustful of every stranger offering help. The lack of assistance for the lost or stranded was stark. If your carriage broke down in a remote area, or if you got hopelessly lost, there was no roadside assistance, no emergency services, and no reliable way to call for help. Your survival would depend entirely on your own resourcefulness, your remaining supplies, and the rare chance encounter with another sympathetic traveler. This profound vulnerability when disoriented or in distress added another chilling layer to the difficulties of travel. The ultimate irony was that the very vastness of the Roman Empire, a testament to its power, also contributed to the overwhelming challenge of communication. As you traveled further from Rome, the familiar landmarks and the pervasive Latin culture would slowly fade, replaced by increasingly diverse and alien territories, exacerbating your sense of being lost and uninformed. Your journey became a constant reminder of the empire's sprawling, uncontrollable diversity. So, your Roman road trip was profoundly sucked by pervasive communication breakdown, the lack of reliable maps, clear road signs, and universal language left you constantly lost and uninformed, struggling to navigate vast, unfamiliar territories. This relentless uncertainty, coupled with the profound psychological toll of constant anxiety and paranoia, was a defining, profoundly horrifying aspect of taking a road trip in the Roman Empire, ensuring that your pursuit of your destination was a continuous, mentally exhausting, and often bewildering ordeal. Even as your spirit wrestled with the confusion of communication breakdowns and the constant fear of getting lost, your Roman road trip was perpetually burdened by an insidious and pervasive reality: the cost. Forget budget travel or cheap gas. The immense financial burden and logistical nightmares of ancient travel made it a luxury for the privileged few, turning your journey into a profoundly sucked ordeal. Imagine the sheer financial outlay required before you even set foot on the road. This wasn't a simple booking. It was a substantial investment, consuming a significant portion of your wealth, or even plunging you into debt. Transportation, whether you owned a carriage or hired one, the costs were immense. A good karuka or reda could be incredibly expensive, akin to buying a luxury car today. Maintaining the carriage repairs, wheel replacements, feeding and stabling the horses or mules, and paying for their care along the route were continuous. High expenses. If you hired a vehicle and driver, the daily rates would quickly accumulate. It truly sucked to pay a fortune just to get around. Retinue. You wouldn't travel alone, especially if you were a wealthy citizen or carrying valuable goods. You would need to hire a retinue of slaves or freedmen as drivers, guards, porters, and personal assistants. You were responsible for their wages if freedmen, food, and lodging. The larger your retinue, the safer you might be, but the more astronomically expensive your journey became. Imagine paying salaries, food, and lodging for a dozen people just to accompany you on a trip. It really sucked to have an entourage that broke the bank. Provisions carrying enough food and water for yourself, your retinue, and your animals for days or weeks was a colossal expense. While some items were basic, bulk purchases added up. Any specialized or preserved foods would be costly. Tolls and taxes. While Roman roads were often free of direct tolls as they were built by the state for military and administrative purposes, you might encounter local levies, customs duties at provincial borders, or even informal fees demanded by corrupt officials or local strongmen, particularly in less controlled regions. These unexpected costs could quickly eat into your budget beyond the upfront and ongoing costs. Your journey was plagued by logistical nightmares that further drained your resources and consumed your time. Delays, Breakdowns, bad weather, illness among your retinue or animals, or simply getting lost, as discussed in Chapter 8, could cause immense delays. Every unplanned stop meant additional days of paying for lodging, food, and fodder, rapidly escalating your expenses. A journey planned for 2 weeks could easily stretch into a month, doubling your costs without any corresponding progress. It truly sucked to be stuck and paying for it. Loss or damage to goods for merchants. This was the ultimate financial peril. Your precious cargo silk, spices, wine. Luxury goods was constantly vulnerable to damage from the rough roads, spoilage due to heat or dampness, or theft by bandits. Any loss directly impacted your profit margins, potentially turning a lucrative venture into a ruinous one. Imagine arriving at a distant market, only to find a third of your goods ruined by rain or stolen by bandits. Your anticipated fortune vanishing before your eyes. Replacements. If a horse died, a wheel broke beyond repair, or vital equipment was lost or stolen, replacing it on the road would be incredibly expensive and time-consuming, further delaying your journey and compounding your financial woes. You were often at the mercy of local prices, which could be exorbitant in remote areas. The overall economic cost of Roman travel meant it was a luxury largely confined to the wealthy elite senators, equestrians, powerful merchants, and imperial officials. For the vast majority of Romans, extensive long-distance travel was an unattainable dream, simply too expensive and too perilous. A common peasant might spend their entire life within a few miles of their village, never seeing the famous roads or the distant cities of the empire, precisely because the cost was prohibitive. It truly sucked that only the rich could travel. One common misconception is that the Roman Empire's infrastructure made travel accessible to everyone, while the roads were physically present. The economic reality of ancient travel, high costs of transport, provision, security, and accommodation meant that it remained largely the domain of the wealthy, the military, or those compelled by state business. The average Roman citizen or peasant would rarely undertake long-distance journeys unless absolutely necessary, e.g., forced migration, military conscription due to the prohibitive expenses and dangers. Historians still meticulously study Roman itineraries, customs manifests, and household accounts when surviving to understand the precise costs of various types of ancient travel and the social strata that could afford it, consistently finding it to be a privilege of the elite. Furthermore, the opportunity cost of your time spent traveling was immense. Weeks or months on the road meant time away from your primary business, your farm, your political obligations, or your family. For a merchant, this tied up capital and limited the number of trade cycles you could complete in a year. For a landowner, it meant being absent from your estate, relying on overseers whose honesty might be questionable. This lost opportunity, this consumption of precious time, was a significant, unquantifiable cost that further eroded the benefit of travel. The psychological toll of this constant financial strain and the logistical nightmares would be immense. You would live with perpetual anxiety about expenses, about potential losses, and about unexpected delays. Every bill at an inn, every repair, every additional purchase would weigh on your mind. The knowledge that a single major setback, a lost wagon, a sick horse, a major robbery could bankrupt you, would create a profound sense of stress and paranoia, turning your journey into a relentless battle against financial ruin. Your dreams of profit were constantly shadowed by the specter of destitution, ensuring that your road trip was often a journey to the brink of financial despair. The sheer vulnerability to fraud and exploitation from innkeepers, local guides, and even your own retinue, if they were dishonest, added another layer of financial peril. They knew you were dependent on them, and They might inflate prices, offer substandard services, or even conspire to rob you, knowing your recourse was limited far from home. This constant need for vigilance against financial trickery added to your mental burden. So, your Roman road trip was profoundly sucked by its immense cost, the astronomical expenses of transportation, retinues, and provisions, coupled with the constant threat of delays, damage to goods, and exploitation, ensured a continuous financial burden. This profound economic strain, making extensive travel a luxury for few and a ruinous gamble for many, was a defining, profoundly horrifying aspect of taking a road trip in the Roman Empire. You've endured the bone-jarring reality of the fabled Roman roads, suffered the agonizingly slow pace of travel, been battered by the uncomfortable carica, risked illness from contaminated food and squalid inns, battled bandits and beasts, weathered the extreme wrath of the weather, struggled through communication breakdowns, and been plagued by the immense financial burden of the journey. As the distant rumble of ancient wheels fades and the phantom ache in your bones finally dissipates, a profound, lingering truth settles upon you. Taking a road trip in the Roman Empire was not a leisurely vacation. It was a physically brutal, mentally exhausting, and often dangerous ordeal, ensuring your supposed adventure was, in fact, a deeply sunded experience. Consider the relentless physical assault that defined every mile. Your body absorbed constant jarring from unsuspended carriages on uneven roads, leading to chronic aches, bruising, and joint pain. You battled extreme heat that caused heat stroke and dehydration, or freezing cold that risked hypothermia and frostbite. Every day was a test of endurance against physical discomfort, environmental extremes, and the sheer fatigue of constant movement. Your body, your primary means of transport, was systematically worn down by the very act of travel. It truly sucked to physically suffer for weeks or months on end. Then there's the pervasive danger and insecurity. The roads, despite imperial efforts, were rife with bandits who could ambush, rob, kidnap, or enslave you. Wild animals added another layer of primal fear. Unsanitary inns and contaminated food and water sources were constant threats, leading to debilitating and often fatal diseases like dysentery and typhoid. You were perpetually vigilant, constantly aware that your life, your freedom, and your fortune could be snatched away at any moment by human malevolence, natural disaster, or unseen microbes. Your adventure was a constant dance with peril. And what about the crushing mental and emotional toll, the agonizingly slow pace of travel, stretching weeks into months, bred profound boredom and frustration? The lack of reliable maps or universal language left you perpetually lost and disoriented, creating immense anxiety and paranoia. You lived in a constant state of hypervigilance, unable to truly relax or trust strangers. This relentless mental strain, coupled with physical exhaustion and homesickness, eroded your spirit, leaving you weary, jaded, and often deeply isolated. Even when surrounded by your retinue, it truly sucked to lose your peace of mind on the road. Finally, the immense, debilitating cost. Far from being accessible, extensive travel was a luxury reserved for the very wealthy, who still bore its immense financial burden. The cost of transportation, retinues, provisions, and unexpected delays could bankrupt even prosperous individuals. For a merchant, weeks or months on the road meant tied-up capital and the terrifying risk of losing everything to market fluctuations or damaged goods. This economic pressure added another layer of anxiety to an already arduous journey, ensuring that the pursuit of profit was shadowed by the specter of utter ruin. Your wealth literally evaporated with every mile The very concept of a road trip in ancient Rome, a symbol of freedom and connection in modern times, was for its inhabitants a stark contrast. It was a testament to human endurance, Roman engineering, and the profound economic power of the empire. But for the individual traveler, it was a constant battle against physical discomfort, environmental hazards, human predators, disease, and relentless financial strain. The grandeur of the roads merely highlighted the immense suffering of those who traversed them, ensuring that every mile gained by the Roman Empire was literally paved with the aches, pains, and anxieties of its weary travelers. One particularly poignant and often overlooked detail is the psychological impact of return. After months or years of enduring such brutal conditions, the constant danger, the perpetual discomfort, the profound isolation reintegrating into the seemingly mundane comforts of civilian life could be disorienting. The returning traveler would carry invisible scars, a heightened sense of vigilance, a deep appreciation for basic amenities, and a perhaps jaded perspective on the civilized world. Having witnessed firsthand the brutal realities of the roads, their understanding of the empire would be uniquely shaped by the hardships endured, distinguishing them from those who never left home. This profound transformation, a kind of traveler's trauma, made the journey a lifelong burden. Even after its physical conclusion, historians still meticulously study Roman philosophical texts, which often feature reflections on travel and its challenges, travelogues by military figures or merchants, and the concept of nostos return in ancient literature to understand the precise psychological impact of long-distance journeys on individuals in the Roman world. Ultimately, your experience of what sucked about taking a road trip in the Roman Empire was a profound, continuous ordeal. It was a grueling test of endurance where every mile brought new miseries, a jarring ride, suffocating dust, extreme weather, contaminated food, lurking bandits, and pervasive disease. This relentless assault on your body, mind, and finances ensured that your supposed adventure was, in fact, a deeply sucked experience, far from any romanticized notion of ancient travel, and leaving a lasting legacy of aches, anxieties, and profound exhaustion. As you now drift into a deep, comforting sleep, let the distant rumble of ancient wheels and the imagined aches of your journey finally subside. You are safe, in your own time, far removed from the brutal realities of ancient travel. May your dreams be peaceful, filled with the quiet certainty of smooth roads, comfortable seats, clean food, and the profound freedom of effortless movement. A stark contrast to the sucky truth we've explored tonight. And now, good night, and have sweet dreams.